She controlled billions. He fixed broken pipes for $12 an hour. The night a group of armed men surrounded Victoria Harrington in a dark parking garage, her money meant nothing. Her influence meant nothing. Every bodyguard she'd ever paid was gone. And the only person standing between her and the kind of violence that doesn't make the news was a quiet man in work boots carrying a dented thermos. A man nobody had ever looked at twice. What happened next would destroy everything she thought she knew about power. If stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's get into it. The elevator doors opened at 11:47 p.m., and Victoria Harrington stepped out into the parking structure beneath Meridian Tower, already reaching for her phone. She had 17 unread messages, a contract that needed her signature before Tokyo opened, and a headache that had been building behind her left eye since 2 in the afternoon. Her heels clicked against the concrete, sharp, even, deliberate, the way everything about Victoria was deliberate. She didn't rush. Rushing was for people who weren't prepared. Her assistant, Clara, had offered twice to call a car to the lobby entrance. Victoria had said no. The lobby at this hour meant doormen and security cameras and the small, suffocating possibility that a photographer from one of the financial blogs would catch her leaving a building that wasn't on her public calendar. She'd learned 3 years ago that even the most innocent meeting could become a story if the wrong lens captured it. So she walked through the parking structure alone. Level B2. Her black company car was parked in the reserved space nearest the stairwell. A habit, not vanity. Nearest exit, fastest out. She was 40 feet from her car when she heard footsteps, not one set. 3, maybe 4. Coming from behind the concrete pillar to her left. Victoria didn't stop walking. She shifted her phone in her hand and pressed the speed dial for Marcus Nguyen, her head of personal security. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. The footsteps kept pace with her. "Miss Harrington," the voice came from ahead. She looked up. A man was standing near the hood of her car, arms loose at his sides, wearing a jacket too heavy for the weather. He was smiling in the way people smile when they know you have nowhere to go. "You've had a busy week," he said. Victoria stopped, not out of fear. At least, that's what she told herself. Out of calculation. She was running numbers. 4 entrances to the structure, all of them behind her now. Her car was between her and the man at the hood. She had pepper spray in her purse and absolutely no illusion that it would help her here. 2 more men stepped out from between the parked cars to her right. "We just want to talk," said the man near the car. "About the board vote." "I don't do street meetings," Victoria said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that, quietly, in the part of her brain that was still running the numbers. "You'll make an exception." He took a step toward her. "Mr. Voss sends his regards." The name hit her like a hand on the shoulder. Unexpected, unwelcome. Marcus Voss. She'd sat across from him in 3 separate acquisition meetings over the past 18 months, watched him try to pry her company apart with offers wrapped in the language of partnership. She'd turned him down each time. She'd thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. "Whatever he's offering is she started. "It's not an offer," the man said. "It's a timeline. You have 72 hours to remove yourself from the board vote on the Helios acquisition. After that, things become uncomfortable for you." "Uncomfortable," she repeated. "For you, for your company, for the people around you." He smiled again. "We know about your assistant, Clara, right? Nice girl." Something cold moved through Victoria's chest. Not fear exactly, something worse. The specific, clarifying terror of realizing the threat isn't abstract anymore. She took 1 step backward, and her heel caught a crack in the concrete. She didn't fall, barely, caught herself on nothing, on instinct. But the moment cost her. The 2 men from her right were closer now. "Just come with us," the man at the car said. "We'll talk. You'll understand the situation better. Then you go home." She knew what "come with us" meant from people like this. She'd grown up in a family that negotiated contracts for a living. She knew the difference between a negotiation and a kidnapping dressed up in business language. "No," she said flatly. The man sighed like she'd disappointed him and nodded to someone behind her. She turned. A 4th man was approaching from the stairwell, big, moving fast, not bothering to hide it anymore. And then someone else stepped out of the shadows between two parked SUVs. Not moving toward her, not part of them, just stepping into the space. A man in dark work pants and a faded gray jacket, carrying a thermos in one hand. He had a maintenance company logo patched onto his shoulder. He looked like he'd just finished replacing a light fixture somewhere in the building and wandered into the wrong level. He looked, Victoria thought, completely ordinary. "Hey," the man in the work jacket said it quietly. Not to her, to the four of them. "You need to leave." The man by her car actually laughed. "Get out of here. This isn't your business." "I know." The maintenance worker set his thermos down on the hood of a nearby sedan, gently, like he was being careful not to scratch it. "Walk away and it stays that way." The fourth man, the one coming from the stairwell, changed direction, started toward the maintenance worker instead. What happened next, Victoria would spend a long time trying to reconstruct in her memory, because it didn't track with anything she thought she understood about how people moved or reacted or fought. The fourth man swung first. It was a serious swing, the kind from someone who'd thrown punches before and expected them to land. It didn't land. The maintenance worker stepped left, not far, just enough, caught the man's arm at the elbow, and used the momentum to put him into the side of a parked car with a sound that echoed through the concrete structure. The man dropped and didn't get up. The next two came simultaneously. Victoria couldn't follow all of it. There was a knee, a shoulder, a controlled collision that sent one man sideways into a pillar, while the other hit the ground hard enough that his jacket pocket spilled loose change across the concrete. Neither of them got up either. The first man, the one who'd been doing the talking, backed toward her car, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Don't," the maintenance worker said. Simple, flat, without raising his voice. The man stopped. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then the man by the car turned and walked quickly toward the exit ramp, not running, but close to it. He didn't look back. Victoria stood in the middle of the parking structure, her phone still clutched in her hand, her heart running a sprint her feet hadn't taken. The maintenance worker picked up his thermos, checked the side of it. Satisfied it wasn't dented, he turned toward her. He was around 40, maybe a little under. Not especially large. She'd noticed that first, back when she thought he was about to get hurt. Medium height, lean, the kind of build that didn't broadcast anything. Dark hair going a little gray at the sides. A face that looked like it had seen a lot of weather. "You okay?" he asked. It was such an absurdly ordinary question after what she'd just watched that Victoria almost laughed. "Who are you?" she said instead. "Ethan Cole. I do maintenance on 4, 6, and 7. He said it like that explained something. "That's not what I meant." He looked at her for a moment, then at the 3 men on the ground, 2 of whom were starting to move. "We should get you inside or get you moving. This won't be the last of it tonight." "What do you mean the last of it?" "I mean, they didn't come alone. Those 4 were the visible ones." He glanced toward the exit ramp. "Your security. Where are they?" "I couldn't reach. Where are they supposed to be?" "Marcus, my security director. He was supposed to be at the lobby entrance. He didn't answer." Something moved across Ethan Cole's face. Not surprise. More like the quiet confirmation of something he'd already suspected. He nodded once and said, "Can you drive?" "Of course I can drive." "Then you should drive. Get somewhere with people. A hotel lobby, somewhere public." He stepped back, giving her room. "You're not coming?" "I'm not your employee." Victoria looked at this man. His faded jacket, his thermos, the total lack of anything remarkable about him, except for what she'd watched him do 30 seconds ago, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was missing information about something important. "I'll pay you," she said. "Whatever you make in a month, right now, just tell me what's happening." Ethan Cole looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite patience and wasn't quite pity. It was something more neutral than both, like he was weighing something privately. "I don't know everything that's happening," he said. "I know that 4 trained men were waiting for you in a private parking structure, which means someone told them you'd be here. I know your security director didn't answer 2 calls after hours. And I know the man they mentioned, Voss, I know that name has been connected to some very serious people. Victoria's phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. She showed it to Ethan without quite knowing why she was showing it to a maintenance worker she'd met 40 seconds ago. He looked at it, didn't touch it. Don't answer that. Why not? Because right now, the only thing they don't have is a fix on where you're going next. The second you answer, you're talking. And people who do this for a living can learn a lot from how someone talks when they're scared. I'm not scared, Victoria said automatically. Ethan Cole looked at her. Just looked. I'm not, she said again, quieter. Okay, he said. No argument, no smile, just moving on. Your car. Can you get somewhere safe in the next 20 minutes? Family, a friend? I don't. It's complicated. A hotel then. Public entrance, doorman, cameras. Victoria looked at the three men on the ground. Two were sitting up now. One was staring at Ethan with an expression she recognized, the specific, recalibrated look of someone who had badly misjudged a situation. She thought about Marcus Voss, about the name on his lips coming out of a man in a parking garage at midnight, about the fact that someone inside her building had told these people exactly where she'd be and exactly what time she'd be there. The attack tonight wasn't random, was it? She said. It wasn't really a question. No. Someone told them. That would be my read. Victoria stood with her car keys in her hand and looked at Ethan Cole, this unremarkable man who'd come out of a shadow and dismantled 4 people without breaking into a sweat, and was now standing there holding a battered thermos, like the whole thing had been mildly inconvenient. Why did you get involved? She asked. It wasn't your fight. He seemed to consider that, not like it was a difficult question, but like he was deciding how much of an honest answer to give. I saw what was happening, he said finally. That's all. It wasn't much of an answer. Victoria Harrington had built her company by reading people, by understanding the distance between what people said and what they meant, and she knew immediately that Ethan Cole's short answer was the outer edge of a much longer story he had no intention of telling her tonight. But she also understood timing, and right now was not the time. I'll be at the Alderton, she said. It's on 5th. I know it. She started toward her car, then stopped, turned back. Mr. Cole. He looked up. What you did tonight, I've had trained security professionals on my payroll for 4 years. None of them have ever... She stopped. Restarted. Thank you. He gave a small nod. Not uncomfortable with it, not warm either, just accepting it the way you accept the weather. Victoria got in her car. She pulled out of the space and drove toward the exit ramp, watching in her rearview mirror as Ethan Cole picked up the fallen thermos, checked his watch, and walked calmly toward the stairwell, like he had somewhere to be. She drove out into the night and the cold November air and the noise of the city, and for the first time since she was 23 years old and had nothing to her name except a laptop and a rented desk and a shared workspace, Victoria Harrington felt genuinely, completely uncertain about what came next. Someone inside her company had set her up tonight. The vote on the Helios acquisition was 6 days away. 6 days that had suddenly become the most dangerous stretch of time in her professional life. And the only person who'd stepped forward to help her was a maintenance worker with a coffee thermos and a past she couldn't read. She merged onto the expressway and pressed Clara's number. It rang twice. Clara, change of plans. I need you to pull everything we have on a man named Ethan Cole. He works building maintenance, floors 4 through 7 at Meridian. I need it by 6 a.m. A pause. Is everything okay? Victoria glanced in her mirror. The parking structure was already gone, swallowed by traffic and distance and the bright, indifferent lights of the city. Not even close, she said, but it will be. She wasn't sure she believed that yet, but she said it like she did. Because that too was something she'd learned early. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was decide how the story sounded before the ending arrived. The file Clara sent at 5:48 a.m. was 14 pages long and told Victoria almost nothing useful. Ethan Cole, 37, born in Rockford, Illinois. High school graduate. Military service, 8 years, honorably discharged. Branch listed as Navy, specialty redacted. After discharge, a series of jobs that didn't connect to each other in any obvious way. Logistics coordinator for a freight company in Virginia. Night security at a medical complex in Nashville. 2 years of nothing on record, then a move to the city 18 months ago. Current employer? Breslin Facility Services, contracted to Meridian Tower. Current residence? An apartment on Delancey, 3rd floor, month-to-month lease. One dependent, a daughter, Lily, age 8, enrolled at Garrison Elementary. No criminal record, no civil suits, no social media presence of any kind. Victoria read the file twice, sitting in her hotel robe with room service coffee going cold on the table beside her. The redacted military specialty was the thing she kept coming back to. She'd seen redacted files before, but her company held government contracts. She knew the language of bureaucratic erasure. And the way Ethan Cole's service record had been stripped down told her the absence was deliberate. Someone hadn't just failed to fill in the details. Someone had taken them out. She called her attorney at 6:15, asked him to see what he could find through channels she didn't need to know about. He called back 40 minutes later and said, simply, "The file on that name goes somewhere I don't have access to. That's all I can tell you." Victoria set her phone down and looked out at the city beginning to gray light itself awake below her window. She had a board meeting in 4 hours, a security director who wasn't answering calls, a parking garage full of questions she didn't have answers to, and a maintenance worker whose past had been professionally erased. She called Ethan Cole's cell number. Claire had found it through his employment file, and he answered on the second ring. "It's Victoria Harrington." "I know." No surprise in his voice, no particular warmth either. "I'd like to meet this morning, if you're available." A pause. She heard something in the background, I'll say the specific high-pitched sound of a cartoon, she realized. Morning television. "I've got to get my daughter to school by 8, he said. "After 8, then." Another pause, longer. "What do you want to meet about?" "I want to hire you." "I have a job." "A different job." She kept her voice even. "Mr. Cole, someone inside my company told 4 men exactly where I'd be last night. My head of security didn't answer emergency calls, and the man who organized that ambush has the resources to try again before I can figure out who I can trust." She stopped. "I need someone who isn't already on my payroll, someone I haven't had the chance to get wrong about yet." Silence on the line. The cartoon sounds faded. He'd moved to another room, she guessed. "I'm a maintenance worker," he said. "You're something else, and we both know it." A long beat. "I'll meet you, but I'm not promising anything." "That's fine. Breslin Coffee on 9th, 9 o'clock. She heard him exhale slowly. "Okay." He hung up without a goodbye, which somehow made her trust him marginally more than she had before. Breslin Coffee was narrow and loud and smelled like burnt espresso and someone's breakfast sandwich. Victoria arrived 7 minutes early and took the table against the back wall out of habit. Sight lines to both the door and the counter. She was wearing a dark blazer over a plain shirt, no jewelry, hair down. As close to anonymous as she ever got. Ethan walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. Work pants, a different jacket than last night, the same general quality of looking like he'd rather be somewhere less public. He spotted her without scanning the room, which she noted, and came straight back. He sat across from her and looked at the menu for about 3 seconds before setting it down. "Coffee?" she asked. "Already had some." A waitress came and Victoria ordered black coffee, and Ethan, after a moment, ordered the same. When the waitress left, he put his hands flat on the table and looked at Victoria with an expression that wasn't unfriendly but wasn't open either. "I looked up Marcus Voss this morning," he said. "Before you ask what I know." "What did you find?" "Enough. He's been trying to acquire your company's core patents for 2 years through proxy buyers. When that didn't work, he pivoted, started approaching your board members individually. I found 3 published interviews where former Harrington executives said things about internal culture that they'd have no reason to say unless someone was shaping a narrative." He paused. "Someone's been building a case to remove you. The parking garage wasn't the beginning. It was just when it got physical." Victoria looked at him. "You found all that this morning." It's not hard to find. It's just that most people don't think to look before something happens. Well, where did you learn to look like that? He ignored the question. You said someone inside your company. The meeting last night wasn't public. Only 4 people knew I'd be at Meridian after 11. Clara, my assistant. Marcus Nguyen, my security director, who still hasn't called back. James Whitfield, my COO. And Raymond Park, the attorney who set up the meeting. Which of them do you actually trust? Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. That's the problem. 24 hours ago, I would have said all 4 without thinking about it. And now? Now I don't know. She said it without drama, which somehow made it land harder than if she'd sounded upset. I've built this company for 8 years. I've been careful about every hire, every promotion, every person who gets close to the center of it, and someone in that circle set me up to be grabbed in a parking garage. She looked out the window. I keep running through it, and I can't make it fit with who I think these people are. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's usually how it works, he said. The person who does it is almost never someone you thought was capable of it. It's always someone you had a reason to trust. Something in his voice when he said it made her think he wasn't talking abstractly. She didn't push it. So you'll help me, she said. I said I'd meet you. Ethan. She almost never used people's first names in business. It felt like a concession. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm asking for someone to watch what's happening from the outside and tell me what they see. You've already demonstrated you're useful in a direct situation, but that's not actually what I need most. He was looking at her with that same neutral expression, the one that gave nothing away. What do you need most? He said. I need someone who'll tell me the truth about what they see, not what I want to hear, not what protects their position. She met his eyes. I have 12 advisors and a board of 9 people, and not one of them has ever once told me something I didn't want to hear, because they all need something from me. She paused. You don't. Something shifted in his face. Not much, just a slight adjustment at the corners of his mouth. Something that wasn't quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. The board vote, he said. The Helios acquisition. What is it? Helios Systems is a defense-adjacent AI firm. We acquire them. We control the most significant predictive logistics platform in the private sector. It's worth, conservatively, $4 billion in locked contracts over the next decade. She kept her voice flat, factual. If I'm removed from the board before the vote, my replacement will reject the deal. Voss gets Helios at a fraction of what it's worth because the alternative buyer collapses without our backing. He's been maneuvering toward this for 2 years. Ethan nodded slowly. When's the vote? 5 days? And you have a security director you can't reach. I've already sent someone to his home. No answer there either. Victoria set her coffee down. Which means either Marcus Nguyen is the leak and he's running, or something has happened to him and I'm about to find out what kind of people I'm actually dealing with. The second option sat on the table between them, and neither of them touched it for a moment. I need you to understand something, Ethan said. He said it carefully, like each word was being placed rather than spoken. If I do this, if I help you, it's not going to look like what you're used to. I'm not going to be at your elbow in a suit. I'm not going to brief your board or manage your PR. I'm going to watch and listen and tell you what I see. And sometimes what I see is going to be things you don't want to know. That's exactly what I'm asking for. And if I tell you that someone you care about is the problem, then I deal with it, she said. Quiet. No hesitation. He studied her for a moment. She had the feeling of being assessed at a level she couldn't entirely see, like there were questions being asked behind the ones he was saying out loud. Okay, he said finally. Okay, you'll do it? Okay, I'll start. We'll see where it goes. He picked up his coffee, which he still hadn't touched, and drank some, made no comment about it being cold. Your COO, Whitfield. Tell me about him. James has been with me since the 2nd year. He came from a capital firm. He understands the financial architecture of the company better than anyone. She paused. He opposed the Helios deal initially, changed his position 6 months ago. Why did he change? He said the numbers shifted in our favor. Did they? Marginally. Not enough to explain a complete reversal. Ethan set down his cup. And the attorney, Park. Raymond handles all the private meetings. Discretion is literally what I pay him for. She hesitated. But he's the one who scheduled last night. He knew the location, the time, and that I'd be alone because the meeting was off the books. Was it unusual, being off the books? For that type of meeting, no. Certain conversations can't go through official channels. Who was the meeting with? Victoria was quiet for a moment. A former Voss employee who claimed to have information about irregularities in Voss's acquisition strategy. Someone was going to tell me about the play before it happened. She stopped. Or I thought that's what it was. Ethan looked at her steadily. The meeting was bait. Yes, I understand that now. The person you met with didn't show. I waited 20 minutes, then left. That's when I came down to the garage. She pressed her lips together. I walked right into it. Ethan didn't say anything that sounded like reassurance, and she appreciated that more than she could explain. He just nodded and pulled a small, battered notebook from his jacket pocket, the kind with a cardboard cover, the kind you bought at a drugstore, and wrote something down in handwriting she couldn't read from across the table. I need access to 3 things, he said without looking up. The security footage from Meridian, all of it, for the last 2 weeks. The visitor logs for the executive floors, and whatever financial reporting you have access to that isn't routed through Whitfield. The footage and logs I can get. The financials will take a day. A day is fine. He closed the notebook. I also need to know something, and I need you to answer it straight. What? How scared are you? Really? The question was simple and direct and somehow harder to answer than anything else he'd asked. Victoria looked down at her coffee cup, at the ring it had left on the paper napkin. Scared enough that I called a maintenance worker I met 45 minutes ago, she said, and I haven't done anything that unplanned in about 6 years. He almost smiled then. Almost. That's honest. It's practical, she said. I don't really do scared, I do calculated response to threat. Right. He stood, tucking the notebook back into his pocket. I'll start with the Meridian footage. You get me the visitor logs by tonight. I can have them by noon. Noon is fine. He pulled on his jacket, looked at her. One more thing. What? Your security director, Nguyen. When did you last speak to him directly? Not through an assistant, not by text, actually spoke to him. Victoria thought back. Wednesday, she said. 3 days ago. What did you talk about? He was updating me on a threat assessment. Someone had sent an anonymous letter to our legal department, something vague about internal instability. I thought it was a disgruntled employee situation. He said he'd look into it. Did he seem off to you? Different? She thought about it honestly. He seemed tired. I remember thinking he looked tired. She paused. I didn't ask him about it. Ethan absorbed that without comment. Then he said, I'll call you this afternoon, and walked toward the front of the coffee shop the same way he'd walked through the parking garage, unhurried, direct, taking up exactly as much space as he needed, and not a bit more. Victoria watched him go and then sat for another few minutes with her cold coffee, thinking about the fact that 8 hours ago she'd been surrounded by men who wanted to use her as leverage in a financial play worth billions, and the person who'd walked her out of it had been picking up a coffee thermos from the hood of a car. She thought about the redacted file, about the military specialty that had been removed so cleanly it left almost no trace of itself. She thought about the way he'd moved in the garage. Not fast exactly, or not only fast, but without any of the hesitation that most people have when violence is actually happening, that half second of the brain refusing to believe what the eyes are seeing. Ethan Cole had had none of that. He'd stepped in like someone setting a table. Routine, muscle memory worn down to something below conscious thought. Whatever he'd been before the maintenance job, it was significant, and whatever it had cost him, because she was sure it had cost him, given how hard he'd worked to bury it. He'd walked back toward it last night without being asked. She didn't know what to do with that yet, but she didn't let go of it either. Cheats. By noon, she had the visitor logs on a secured drive and a voicemail from her attorney confirming that Marcus Nguyen's car had been found in a long-term lot at the airport, with no record of him boarding any flight. The police had been notified. Her attorney used the word concerning 4 times in a 90-second message. She forwarded the information to Ethan's cell. He called back in under 3 minutes. Airport lot, he said. Long-term parking. No flight. Yes. That's staged. He said it matter-of-factly. Someone wants you to think he ran. They put the car there to point the story in a direction. A chill moved through her that she didn't acknowledge out loud. You think something happened to him? I think he either ran or someone made it look like he ran. And right now I don't have enough to know which. A pause. Have the police called you? Not yet. They will. When they do, cooperate completely and tell them everything from last night. Don't protect your company's reputation by filtering what you say. I know how to talk to police. I'm sure you do. I'm also sure your first instinct will be to manage the narrative. She pressed her mouth together. He wasn't wrong. What are you finding in the footage? I've been through 6 days of lobby and elevator footage. Your security director met with someone on Tuesday night after building hours. The angle isn't great and the visitor badge was registered under a shell name. But I have a physical description that matches a known employee of one of Voss's subsidiary companies. I'm cross-referencing now. How are you cross-referencing? A brief pause. I have some ways of finding things that aren't through normal channels. She decided not to ask a follow-up question. What do you need from me now? Tonight I need access to the executive floor after hours, unofficial. You want to search the offices. I want to look at the spaces where your COO and your legal team work. Yes, specifically anything connected to a secured filing system. I won't touch anything I don't have to. James's office has a private safe. I'm not going to open his safe. A beat. Unless I need to. That's not... She stopped. Fine. I'll arrange access. 11 o'clock? That works. Ethan. She said his name with a specific intent to make him wait for what she was about to say. If you find something about James, what he knows, what he's done, I'll tell you what I find and let you decide what to do with it. He paused. But I'm not going to soften it. I know. That's why I'm telling you to look. She hung up and sat for a long moment in the silence of the hotel room, which had begun to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a position. A place she'd retreated to while she figured out which direction the fight was coming from. Someone in her inner circle had handed her to those men in the parking garage, had stood somewhere warm and safe, maybe gone home that night and eaten dinner and answered emails, while 4 people waited in the concrete dark for her to walk out alone. She needed to know who. She needed to know before the board vote, before Marcus Voss made another move. Before anyone else in her life got tired or staged or disappeared into a long-term parking lot with a story that didn't hold up. She pulled the visitor log from the secured drive and started reading. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary afternoon way, full of people who had no idea that 6 floors above a coffee shop on 9th Street, a woman who controlled one of the most powerful technology companies in the country was sitting at a hotel desk trying to figure out which of the people closest to her had decided she was expendable. She read every name on the log. She took her time. She owed Marcus Nguyen that much, at least. The executive floor at 11 at night felt like a different building entirely. Victoria had been in these offices at every hour. Early mornings before the cleaning crew finished, late nights when a contract deadline meant the lights stayed on past midnight. But there was something particular about the emptiness now, when it wasn't her choice, when it was necessary. The corridor outside James Whitfield's office was lit by the low emergency strips along the baseboards, and the light made everything look vaguely medical, like a room after surgery. Ethan moved through it without using a flashlight. He'd asked for the floor's after-hours lighting to stay on its normal automatic cycle, nothing that would register as unusual on the building's power logs, and he navigated by that dim, even glow with the ease of someone whose eyes had adjusted to worse. Victoria walked 2 steps behind him and said nothing. She'd agreed to that before they came up. She would observe, she wouldn't touch anything, and if he told her to stop, she'd stop. It had felt like a strange set of rules to agree to in her own building, but standing here now, watching him work, she understood the logic of it. He wasn't moving like someone searching a place. He was moving like someone reading one. He paused outside James's door. Your COO's assistant, he said quietly. Where does she sit? Desk at the end of the hall. Why? She faced the door? No, she faces the window wall. He nodded once and used the access card Victoria had arranged to open the office. He didn't go straight to the desk. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking, the way you look at something when you're trying to understand the shape of it before you touch it. Then he went to the filing cabinet beside the east window. Third drawer. He didn't open it. He crouched and looked at the lock, then stood. "This drawer has been opened recently," he said. "The finish on the lock face is worn differently than the others. Someone's been in here more than the standard cleaning cycle would account for." "James is always working late. It could be him." "It could be." He moved to the desk. The desktop was clean. Too clean, Victoria thought, for a man who was known for working through stacks of paper. She'd teased him about it once, the organized chaos of his system. Now his desk looked cleared, deliberate. Ethan opened the top right drawer, unlocked, and looked at the contents without disturbing them. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and used the non-writing end to shift a folder slightly to the left, looked at what was beneath it. "These are routing numbers," he said. Victoria stepped closer. He tilted the folder so she could see without touching. A single printed sheet, unmarked header, 2 columns of numbers. She looked at them, and something caught in her memory. A specific format she'd seen before in the financial disclosures she'd reviewed when they were first evaluating Helios. "Those are Helios account prefixes," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "The format, the first 6 digits. That's how Helios structures their internal accounts." Ethan carefully returned the folder to its original position. Who would James have legitimate reason to have those from? No one. The financial due diligence went through Raymond and our acquisitions team. James reviewed summary reports, not underlying account data. So he either got it from Raymond or he got it from somewhere he shouldn't have. Victoria straightened. She was aware of a specific sensation she'd had only a handful of times in her life. The moment when a thing you've been afraid might be true stops being a possibility and becomes actual. It had a particular quality of stillness to it, like the second after a car accident when everything is still and wrong, and there's nothing yet to do except understand what happened. "He changed his position on Helios 6 months ago," she said, quietly, more to herself than to Ethan. "You mentioned that this morning. He said the numbers shifted, but we hadn't released any new financial modeling to the board yet at that point. The revised projections didn't go out until 4 months ago." She stopped. "He changed his position before he had any reason to." Ethan looked at her. He didn't say anything. "He was already working with Voss when he changed his vote," she said. "He changed it to buy credibility, to be the reasonable voice on the board who'd come around. Because when I was removed and the deal fell apart, he needed to look like someone who'd tried to support it. That's my read, too." Victoria turned and walked to the window. The city below looked exactly like it always did. Indifferent, moving, completely uninvested in the fact that a man she'd spent 8 years building something with had been running a quiet demolition operation from the inside. "He was at every strategy meeting," she said, "every forward planning session for the last 2 years. He knows every vulnerability in our supply chain, every partner relationship with any tension in it, every board member who's ever expressed any doubt about my direction." She paused. "He was the most valuable person in the room for someone who wanted to take this company apart." "How much does he know about your personal schedule? Your security arrangements?" She turned back. "Everything. He sits in the same security briefings I do." A beat. "He knew about the off-the-books meeting Tuesday. I mentioned it to him in passing, just in passing as context because Raymond set it up through our shared administrative calendar. So he knew when, he knew where. He knew you'd come down to B2 alone." She felt something that wasn't quite anger. Anger was too clean for what this was, something more complicated with grief mixed into it, because she'd liked James Whitfield. Not in the warm, uncomplicated way she liked Clara, but in the specific way you come to respect someone you fought next to. She'd fought with him through 2 acquisition battles, through a regulatory crisis in year 4 that had nearly taken the whole company down. She'd trusted him because she'd watched him be good at hard things. Apparently she'd been watching a performance. "What about Raymond?" she said. Ethan moved toward the door. "Raymond Park is more complicated. I don't think he was a willing participant. I think he was used." "How?" "The anonymous letter. The one your security director brought you Wednesday. The one about internal instability. What about it? I found a copy in the building's outgoing document log from 11 days ago. It was sent from a registered account under Raymond's secretary's login. But the access timestamp is 6:47 a.m., and Raymond's building entry log shows he didn't arrive until 8:15 that day. Victoria frowned. Someone used his secretary's credentials. Someone who had access to her login, which, in a building where shared passwords are common for administrative staff, he let the implication finish itself. James could have had it, she said. James could have had it. Ethan held the door for her as they stepped back into the corridor. The letter was designed to get Nguyen looking in a specific direction. Keep him busy chasing a domestic threat while the external play was already in motion. It also put Nguyen in a position where, if he reported back to you with nothing concrete, he looked ineffective, which may be why he looked tired when you saw him Wednesday. He'd been running down a manufactured lead for a week and couldn't figure out why it kept going nowhere. Victoria thought of Marcus Nguyen, 15 years in private security, former Federal Protective Service, methodical and humorless and entirely trustworthy. She thought of his car in the long-term lot. "Where is he?" she said. Not a question exactly, a worry spoken out loud. "I don't know yet." Ethan's voice was even, but not careless. "I'm working on it." They reached the elevator. She pressed the call button and they stood waiting in the low light, and for a moment the only sound was the building's ventilation doing its quiet, unceasing work. "How long have you done this?" she asked. "Not the maintenance job. The other thing, looking at places, finding what's wrong." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Long enough," he said. "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." The elevator arrived. They stepped in and he pressed B1 and the doors closed and they rode down in silence for 3 floors before he said, "I was operational for 6 years after my initial training. Before that, 2 years of training. Before that, I was 20 years old and I thought I knew what I was getting into." "Did you?" "No." He said it without bitterness, like stating the color of a wall. "Nobody does." "Why did you leave?" The elevator opened. He stepped out and she followed, and he walked toward her car. She'd parked in B1 tonight, not B2 for reasons that didn't need explaining, and he said, "I lost 3 teammates on a mission that should have gone differently. Came home. My daughter was 2. He paused. "She's a real person. She needed breakfast made and cartoons and someone to take her to the park. All of that felt more real than anything I'd been doing." He stopped at her car. "That's the honest version." Victoria looked at him. She was aware of the gap between his story and her own, between the scale of what he'd experienced and the scale of what she'd built. And she was aware that both of them had, in different ways, ended up in a parking garage on a Tuesday night with no good options. "Your daughter," she said. "Lily." He looked at her sideways. "You ran a background check." "Yes." "What else did you find?" "Not much. Your file is mostly empty." He almost smiled. "That's by design." "I figured." She unlocked her car. "Is she safe? If these people know who you are?" "She's with her aunt in Rockford as of this morning." He said it simply, like moving his daughter 2 states away was a logistics problem he'd already solved. "I made that call before I met you for coffee." Victoria absorbed that. He'd moved his daughter before the meeting, before she'd even made her case for why he should help her. He'd already understood the geometry of the situation, and he'd already made the necessary move, quietly, without mentioning it, without asking for acknowledgement. "You knew they'd find out you were involved," she said. "I knew they might." That was enough. She got in the car and lowered the window. He stood on the concrete with his hands in his jacket pockets, and in the low light of the parking structure, he looked very much like what he'd been when she first saw him. Ordinary, unremarkable, a man you'd forget 5 minutes after passing him on the street, except that she understood now that the ordinariness was a choice, not a disguise exactly, more like a preference, a decision about how much of himself to make visible. "Tomorrow," she said, "the board. James will be there. Don't treat him differently. Don't look at him differently, if you can help it." "I can help it." Good. What are we looking for next? The financial transfers. You said you'd have the reports that don't go through Whitfield. I'll have them first thing. He nodded, stepped back, started to go. Ethan, he turned. Thank you for moving her. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, get some sleep, and turned and walked toward the stairwell, and the concrete and the shadows absorbed him the way they had the first night, like he knew exactly how to disappear into a space. The financial reports arrived from her personal accountant at 6 the next morning, and by 8, Ethan was sitting at Victoria's hotel room table. She'd had the suite upgraded to one with a proper workspace, with 3 printed reports spread in front of him, and her laptop open to a secured financial interface she'd given him read-only access to. He'd brought coffee. 2 cups from the place on the corner, not the hotel. He'd brought one for her without asking whether she wanted it, and she'd taken it without mentioning that she'd already had 2 from room service. He worked quietly, and she worked at the other end of the table on board preparation, and the room had a functional, pressurized quiet that she found easier than she expected. She'd had assistants, consultants, advisors in her workspace for years, and most of them carried a low hum of performance, the visible effort of being useful. Ethan didn't perform. He worked. At 9:40, he said, "Here." She moved to his side of the table. He had one of the financial reports open to a subsection she'd flagged herself but hadn't fully understood, a series of internal transfers between subsidiary accounts that had been routed through a holding structure that technically fell within board-approved parameters but existed at the edge of them. These transfers, he said, pointing with one finger, they're not illegal on their face. The amounts are within James's discretionary authority. But the timing. He pulled the second report beside the first. Every transfer happens within 48 hours of a major board communication. See? This one, September 14th, 2 days after you sent the board the initial Helios proposal. This one, October 2nd, 2 days after the due diligence summary. This one, November 3rd, she said, 2 days after I circulated the preliminary vote timeline. She straightened. He's been forwarding information to someone and funneling payments as cover for the channel. The transfers go into a holding account that I can't trace from here without better access, but the pattern is unmistakable. He sat back. James Whitfield has been running a parallel intelligence operation inside your company for at least 7 months. Every time you advanced the Helios process, Voss knew about it within 48 hours. Victoria sat down in the chair across from him. She put her hands flat on the table, looking at the numbers, and let herself feel, for just a controlled moment, the full weight of what 7 months of that meant. 7 months of strategy meetings compromised. 7 months of positioning against a man who always knew what she was going to do before she did it. 7 months of fighting at a disadvantage she didn't know she had. He was why we kept losing the proxy buyers, she said quietly. Every time we identified one of Voss's proxy acquisitions and tried to block it, he was already repositioned before we could act. I thought we just weren't fast enough. You weren't, because you were the leak's primary source. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. Can we use this? In front of the board? Not alone. The pattern is compelling, but a good attorney frames it as coincidence. You'd need either a direct communication connecting these transfers to Voss, or you'd need James to do something in front of witnesses that removes any ambiguity. And how do we get either of those things in 4 days? Ethan picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. The board vote is the bait, he said. As long as Voss believes the plan is working, he has no reason to change it, which means he'll push for one final move to guarantee the outcome. He looked at her. He's going to try to remove you before the vote, not just lobby for it, force it. Something that gives the board no choice. A scandal. Or an incident. Something that looks like either incompetence or a breach of judgment. Something that gives your most neutral board members a reason to vote for your removal without feeling like they're being manipulated. Victoria thought about it. She was good at this, at projecting the shape of a move before it was made. It was the skill that had built her company, the ability to sit inside someone else's logic and find the move they'd make next. He'll use the security incident, she said, the parking garage. He'll make a case that I exercised poor judgment, off-the-books meeting, dismissed my security team, created a liability exposure for the company. That's my guess. Except I didn't dismiss my security team. My security director was compromised without my knowledge. Which you can't prove yet. Which I can't prove yet. She tapped one finger on the table. Unless Marcus Nguyen is found and can speak for himself. I'm working on that. How? He was quiet for a moment. I know someone, from before. Someone who's better at finding missing people than I am. A pause. It's not a comfortable call to make, but I'll make it. She looked at him across the table. This man who had, in the space of 48 hours, systematically dismantled the security of her situation and started rebuilding it with whatever he had available. And she thought about what it cost him to reference his former life, even obliquely. He didn't do it easily. You could see that. What do you need from me today? She said. I need you to go to the office. Normal day, board prep meeting at what time? 2 o'clock. Go. Sit across from James Whitfield and go through the agenda and don't change a single thing about how you talk to him. And while I'm doing that, I'll be looking for your security director. At 10:15, Victoria Harrington straightened her jacket, picked up her bag, and left the hotel with the practiced composure of someone who had never spent the previous 2 days operating out of a borrowed room with a former covert operative and a table full of financial evidence against her most trusted executive. She took a car to Harrington Technologies, walked through the lobby, said good morning to the front desk team by name, the way she always did, took the elevator to the executive floor and walked past James Whitfield's office, where the lights were already on and his assistant was sorting correspondence at the outer desk. Morning, Helen, she said, not slowing down. Good morning, Ms. Harrington. She went to her own office and sat down and opened her calendar and began preparing for the 2 o'clock meeting with the systematic focus that had carried her through every hard moment in the history of this company. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when Clara came in at 10:30 to review the day, was even and direct. Inside, she was taking the situation apart and putting it back together in a different configuration, one where James Whitfield's information pipeline went dry, where Marcus Voss made his final move not against a woman who didn't see it coming, but against a woman who had been waiting for it. She just needed Marcus Nguyen to be alive. She needed Ethan to find him. And she needed 4 days. 4 days that already felt like they were running shorter than the calendar said they were. At 1:15 p.m., while Victoria was in a preliminary call with her legal team, her phone buzzed on silent. A text from an unknown number. 4 words. He's alive. Call me. She excused herself from the call, stepped into her private washroom, and dialed back. Ethan answered before the first ring finished. Nguyen is in a private medical facility in Westbrook, 40 minutes out. He's conscious. A beat. He didn't run. He was taken Wednesday night, after he left the office. They held him, they threatened him, and when that didn't produce a resignation letter, Ethan paused in the way people pause when they're choosing their words around a thing they don't want to be blunt about. They made sure he couldn't make any calls. Victoria pressed one hand flat against the cold of the washroom wall. Is he going to be okay? He will be. My contact got him out this morning. Another pause. He wants to talk to you. When? Tonight, if you can get to Westbrook without James Whitfield knowing you've left the building. I can manage that. Victoria. He said her name differently than he usually did. Not formally, not with distance. Like he was making sure she was actually listening. Nguyen saw the people who took him. He can identify them. And he told my contact something else. What? He knows about a meeting between Whitfield and a Voss intermediary. He knows the date, the location, the subject. A pause. He was supposed to be surveillance on that meeting. Whitfield had sent him on what looked like a routine threat assessment job, but what he was actually doing was building cover for the meeting. When Nguyen figured it out, that's when they moved on him. Victoria stood very still in the small room, with the noise of her company going on outside the door. Phones, movement, the particular ambient sound of a place that was still running because it didn't know yet how close it had come to something irreversible. He has documentation, she said. He has photographs. He was careful enough to get photographs before they found him. She breathed in slowly. Out. 4 days. She had 4 days, a former Navy operative, a hospitalized security director with photographs, and a financial paper trail that pointed in one very clear direction. Marcus Voss had spent 7 months building toward this moment. She intended to use every one of the next 4 days to take it apart. The Westbrook facility was 43 minutes from the city on a route that avoided every toll camera, which was how Ethan had given her directions. Not by street name, but by what to avoid. Victoria had followed them exactly, navigating by the map on her phone with the location sharing turned off, having told Clara she was going to a private dinner with a potential investor and would be unreachable until 9. She hated lying to Clara. Clara was the one person in her professional life she was almost entirely certain about, and the weight of keeping her outside this felt like a small, constant pressure behind her sternum. But Ethan had been clear. The fewer people who knew where she was going tonight, the better. Until they understood the full reach of James Whitfield's information network, every person who knew her movements was a potential vector. So she drove alone through the November dark and thought about Marcus Nguyen. The facility was a private medical clinic that operated out of a converted Victorian house on 2 acres of landscape property. The kind of place that didn't advertise, that existed for people who needed medical care without the paperwork trail of a conventional hospital. Ethan's contact had placed Nguyen there, and when Victoria pulled into the gravel drive and cut her headlights, Ethan was already standing near the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the road behind her. "Anyone follow you?" he asked when she got out. "No." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She said it without irritation. She understood by now that his questions weren't doubts about her competence. They were the way he processed a situation, running through the checklist out loud. He led her inside. The front room smelled like antiseptic and old wood, and the particular quiet of a place where people came to recover from things they couldn't discuss. A woman in scrubs nodded at Ethan like she knew him, didn't ask for identification from either of them, and pointed them down a narrow hallway. Marcus Nguyen was sitting up in the bed when they came in. He was 51 years old and had always looked to Victoria like a man who'd decided at some point that the only honest facial expression was mild skepticism. He'd looked that way in job interviews, in crisis briefings, in the middle of a regulatory audit that had taken 3 months to resolve. Tonight, he looked different, older. The left side of his face was discolored from his temple to his jaw, and his right hand was bandaged to the wrist, and the skeptical expression was still there, but it was working harder than usual. "Ms. Harrington," he said. "Marcus." She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat. "How are you?" "Functional." He looked at Ethan, who had positioned himself near the door. "You're Cole." "Yes." "You trained with the unit out of Dam Neck." It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at him steadily. "Among other places." Nguyen nodded once, satisfied with whatever he'd been confirming. Then he looked back at Victoria. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything right now. Tell me what happened." He told it in the flat, sequential way of someone who'd been trained to debrief. No editorializing, just sequence. Wednesday evening, 6:15. He'd been leaving the building after his shift when a car pulled alongside him on the parking ramp. 2 men. They were professional about it. Not aggressive initially, which was how they got him into the car before the situation was clear. He'd underestimated the escalation speed, he said, and the way he said it told Victoria he hadn't forgiven himself for that yet. They'd held him at a location he believed was a commercial property in the warehouse district. He'd tracked the drive time and the ambient sounds, estimated the building's characteristics from what he could hear. 2 days. They'd wanted a signed letter alleging that Victoria had created a hostile work environment, had misused company resources, and had pressured security staff to falsify threat assessments. The letter was pre-written. They just needed his signature and his testimony if it came to that. "They told me you'd be removed from the board before the vote regardless," he said. "That signing would go better for me personally." A pause. "I told them no." "I know," Victoria said. "They weren't expecting that. They're used to dealing with people who have more to lose than they do." He shifted slightly in the bed and didn't wince, but it cost him something. On the second day, they changed tactics, less conversation, more direct. He glanced at his bandaged hand. That's when your man's contact showed up. Victoria looked at Ethan. He said nothing. The photographs, she said to Nguyen. Tell me about those. 3 weeks ago, Whitfield sent me to observe a property in the Garfield district. He said it was a due diligence job, a potential data center acquisition. He needed discreet eyes on the property because the seller had privacy concerns. It was the kind of job I'd done for the company before. I went. He paused. Except when I got there, the activity at the property wasn't a real estate meeting. It was Whitfield and 2 men I didn't recognize and a 3rd man I did. Who? Dennis Carr. He's Voss's VP of Corporate Development. I've seen him in the published coverage of 3 of Voss's previous acquisitions. Nguyen looked at her steadily. I was careful. I got photographs from the north side of the property, clear shots of all 4 men, one of them with documents being exchanged. I sent copies to a personal account before I got back to the office. He reached toward the small table beside the bed and slid a phone toward her. The login is written inside the case. Victoria took the phone. She looked at it and then at Nguyen. You didn't bring this to me when you saw it. No. He said it without excuse. I wasn't sure yet. I wanted to understand what I'd seen before I walked into your office with an accusation against your COO based on a parking lot surveillance. I was building a fuller picture. A beat. I ran out of time. She nodded. She understood the logic of it, even if it had cost him 2 days in a room with people who didn't negotiate. She might have made the same call. She handed the phone to Ethan, who opened the case, found the written login, and accessed the account. He scrolled through without expression. Then he held the screen toward her. The photographs were clear, daylight, moderate distance, but the faces were identifiable. James Whitfield in a dark coat, his posture slightly hunched in the way it got when he was uncomfortable with something. Dennis Carr across from him, holding a folder. The 2 unidentified men bracketing the scene like parentheses. This is enough, Ethan said. For the board, Victoria said, combined with the financial transfers. And my testimony, Nguyen added. I'll give it whenever you need it. Victoria looked at her security director, the man who'd said no twice and paid for it in a warehouse in the Garfield district, and felt something pull at her that she didn't have an easy name for. Gratitude was too small. Respect was too clinical. We're going to get you proper care after this, she said. Real hospital, your choice. After the vote, he said. After the vote, she agreed. They drove back separately, and by the time Victoria reached the hotel, it was past 10, and Ethan was already in the suite's workspace, laptop open, the photographs from Nguyen's account transferred to a secured drive. She sat across from him, and they worked for 2 hours, building the package, financial transfers, visitor logs, the surveillance photographs, the timeline of the transfers relative to board communications, rendered in a simple, clear format that wouldn't require financial sophistication to follow. Ethan laid it out with a precision that she recognized as professional. Not the precision of someone trying to make something look impressive, but the precision of someone who'd built cases before, who understood the difference between compelling and provable. At one point, she looked up and found him staring at the middle distance rather than the screen, and she waited. The people who grabbed Nguyen, he said. The 2 I don't have identified yet. I know the type. They're not local contractors. What do you mean? I mean, they're not hired muscle from someone's contact list. The way they handled Nguyen, the escalation pattern, the pre-written testimony letter, that's organized. That's someone with resources and a structure. He came back to the screen. Voss has been involved in 3 previous hostile acquisition attempts. In 2 of them, the target's key executives experienced personal incidents. One had a break-in, one had a car accident that was ruled an accident. Both happened in the final weeks before a vote. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You looked into him. This morning, while you were in your board prep meeting. He pulled up a window on the laptop and turned it toward her. A financial timeline, 4 companies, 5 years. He does this. It's his acquisition strategy, not the primary layer, but the layer underneath. The legitimate financial maneuvering is the visible part. The pressure underneath is what makes it work. She studied the timeline. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because the incidents are never traceable back to him. The executives are too embarrassed to report what happened, or they can't prove it, or by the time it's over, they've taken a settlement that includes an NDA. He paused. You're the first person he's tried this on who isn't running scared. I have Nguyen's photographs. You do. He closed the laptop. We still have 3 days until the vote. That's 3 days where Voss doesn't know his plan has been compromised, which means he's going to make a final move. You said that before. What does the final move look like? He leaned back in the chair. She noticed for the first time that he looked tired. Not in a complaining way, he didn't wear it that way, but in the way of someone who'd been running on a different fuel than sleep for a couple of days and was starting to feel the math of it. He knows about the garage, Ethan said. He knows it didn't work. He knows Nguyen is missing and hasn't produced the letter. So his play with the board, the scandal angle you identified, needs a different shape now. He thought for a moment. He'll use the garage itself, not as a scandal about your judgment, as a security threat. He'll make a case to the board that the company's assets are at risk while you're CEO, that there are parties with hostile interest in Harrington Technologies who are specifically targeting you, and that your continued presence as CEO creates an ongoing liability. Victoria frowned. Victoria, he creates the threat and then uses it as justification to remove me. It's clean. The board members who are already uncertain get a face-saving reason to vote for removal. They're not removing you because you're bad at your job. They're removing you to protect the company. Which board members does he have? Besides Whitfield? I'd guess 2 more, based on the timeline of the transfers and who Whitfield has been having private meetings with. He opened the laptop again, pulled up the board roster. Gerald Hatch. He's been skeptical of the Helios deal from the beginning, and Whitfield had 3 separate dinners with him in the last 6 weeks. Gerald's cautious. He's not corrupt. He doesn't have to be corrupt. He just has to be uncertain. Whitfield feeds him enough doubt, and he votes the way his doubt tells him. He pointed at the second name. Sandra Reyes. Victoria exhaled. Sandra. She voted against you on the offshore partnership 2 years ago. She's on record as believing the company is overextended. She's not wrong about the overextension. She's just wrong about what to do about it. Victoria pressed her fingers to her forehead for a moment. If Gerald and Sandra vote with Whitfield, we need every other board member. 6 votes to hold. I have 5 I'm certain of. I need a 6th. Paul Carmichael, Ethan said. She looked at him. You've been reading the board profiles. This afternoon, Carmichael has been quiet. He hasn't committed publicly to either side of the Helios debate. He's a swing vote and he knows it. He met her eyes. What does he care about? Continuity. He joined the board because he believed in the long-term architecture of the company. He's not interested in short-term plays. She thought about it. If I can show him that removing me destabilizes the company's long-term position, that it's not a protective move but a destructive one. Show him the package, not all of it. Enough. Enough to make him see the shape of what Voss is actually doing. Ethan nodded. Before the board meeting, not during. I'll call him tomorrow. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet that settles when a plan has been laid out and everyone in the room understands it's real now, not hypothetical. That the next move is actual. Then Ethan said, I need to tell you something. His tone had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. She set down her pen. The 2 unidentified men from Nguyen's photographs. I sent them to my contact tonight while you were driving back. He paused. One of them came back with a flag. His name is Conrad Ryle. He's a former contractor, not military, private sector, the kind of private sector that does work in jurisdictions where accountability is loose. Another pause. He worked adjacent to operations I was involved in. Not directly, but adjacent. She waited. He knows who I am, Ethan said. Not Ethan Cole, the maintenance worker. The other thing. He said the other thing without drama, without trying to make it sound significant, which somehow made it more significant. Which means Voss's people didn't just happen to pick up 4 guys for a parking garage job. They picked people who could identify me, who knew what they were dealing with if I got involved. Victoria understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. This was never just about me. I don't know that for certain. But you think it. He looked at the table. I think Conrad Ryle doesn't take domestic corporate jobs for the rate you'd pay a street crew. He takes them when there's a secondary objective. He met her eyes. I think someone told Voss that I was in the building, that I'd been there for 18 months. And Voss, or someone Voss works with, saw an opportunity to draw you out, to confirm I was still operational, or to remove me. Both, maybe. He said it evenly, like he'd had time to sit with it and reach a kind of flat acceptance. They used you to get to me as much as they used your company to apply pressure on you. Victoria thought about the cold geometry of that. She thought about what it meant that Ethan Cole, who had spent 18 months fixing light fixtures and picking up his daughter from school and making himself as invisible as a person could make themselves, had been specifically calculated into someone's corporate acquisition strategy. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her with slight surprise, like that wasn't the response he'd expected. "This put you back into something you left deliberately," she said. "Whatever it cost you to leave it, I'm sorry this pulled you back." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't pull me back. I stepped out of a shadow. That was my choice." Still, he agreed, quieter. He looked at his hands on the table. "My daughter's safe. That's the part that matters most." He paused. "Everything else is just work." She looked at him. She thought about what it meant to make the particular kind of peace with yourself that allowed you to call the situation they were sitting in just work. She thought about the teammates he'd mentioned, the ones he'd lost. She thought about what it cost someone to walk out of a world like that, to rebuild something ordinary and domestic and good, and to have that ordinary good life be specifically targeted because of who you used to be. "After the vote," she said, "all of this, after it's done, I want to understand what you actually need, not what you'll accept, what you need." He studied her across the table. "You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't. That's not what I'm talking about." A long moment. He nodded slowly, not committing to anything specific, but not dismissing it either. 3 days, he said. "Let's get through 3 days first." The following morning, she called Paul Carmichael at 8:15 before his office hours, when she knew he'd answer his personal cell because he always started his morning with an hour of reading before his day officially began. He answered on the third ring with his typical slightly distracted greeting, and she told him she needed 30 minutes of his time. Private, not through the office. He heard something in her voice. She wasn't sure what. She thought she was holding it well, and he said he'd meet her at noon. She sent Ethan a text. "Carmichael, noon." His response came back in under a minute. "Good. I'll be outside." She appreciated that he'd said "I'll be outside" rather than asking whether she wanted him there. He understood her well enough by now to know that she needed to have this conversation alone. That bringing him into a board member relationship would change the dynamic in ways that could backfire. But he'd also understood, without being told, that she didn't want him to be unreachable. At 10:15, James Whitfield knocked on her open office door. She looked up from her desk and manufactured exactly the expression she would have had 3 days ago. Mildly welcoming, professionally focused, the specific warmth she'd built with him over 8 years of working closely together. "Got a minute?" he said. "Of course." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." He sat. He was dressed well, as always. James had a particular investment in appearing groomed that she'd always taken as a sign of self-respect. Now she looked at it differently. A performance. Not of competence, but of belonging. Of someone who needed to look like he deserved the room he was in. "I wanted to check in about the vote," he said. 3 days out. "How are you feeling about it?" "Confident," she said. Flat, unhesitating. He nodded slowly. "Good. Good." A pause that lasted just a beat too long. "I've been hearing some noise from Gerald. He's still uncertain about the liability exposure on the Helios patents. Gerald's been uncertain about everything for 2 years. He'll be fine. And Sandra will vote on the merits." She met his eyes. "The merits support the acquisition. I'm not worried about Sandra." James looked at her with the expression she now understood was the mask version of him. Engaged, collegial, carrying something underneath it that had nothing to do with what he was saying out loud. "You seem steady. After everything this week, the security situation?" "I'm always steady, James." "Of course." He paused. "Have the police found Nguyen?" "I haven't heard an update. She said it with the particular quality of mild concern she'd have expressed before she knew what she knew. I assume they're working it. It's a bad situation. For the company, if this becomes public before the vote, then we'd better make sure it doesn't. She let the sentence sit. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, or were you just checking in? He smiled, the rehearsed, comfortable smile she'd watched him deploy in 100 difficult meetings. Just checking in, he said. You know how I am. 3 days out, I get nervous. You always do, she said, and it always goes fine. He laughed at that, stood, buttoned his jacket, and thanked her for her time. She watched him walk back down the corridor and felt the specific, contained fury of understanding exactly what was underneath the performance and not being able to do anything about it yet. 3 days. She needed 3 more days of this.
Damn.
Paul Carmichael was a 63-year-old man who had built and sold 2 software companies before joining her board, and he had the particular quality of someone who had been through enough to stop performing certainty. He listened to everything she laid out, the financial transfers, the photographs, the timeline, the redacted elements she could share without compromising Nguyen's safety, without interrupting, with his hands folded on the table and his eyes steady on hers. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known about Whitfield? He said. 3 days. Why didn't you go to the board immediately? Because going to the board means going through channels that James has had access to for 7 months. I needed to have everything before I gave him any warning. Carmichael looked at the photographs on the table between them, at Dennis Carr and James Whitfield in a parking lot 3 weeks ago. What do you need from me? I need to know where you stand. That's direct. We're 3 days out, Paul. I don't have time for diplomatic. He picked up one of the photographs, held it at arm's length the way people do when their reading glasses aren't doing enough. I've had doubts about the Helios deal, he said. I want you to know that. This doesn't change my doubts. It shouldn't. My case for the acquisition stands on its own merits. But? He looked at her. But the alternative isn't that we reject Helios on the merits and find a better path. The alternative, if this play succeeds, is that I'm removed, the deal dies, and Voss takes Helios at a price that represents the single most significant competitive advantage transfer in this company's history. She kept her voice even. Your doubts about the acquisition are legitimate. I'm asking you to weigh them against what you know about how this company was built and who built it. Carmichael set down the photograph. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. You should have brought this to me sooner, Victoria. I know. You should trust the board more than you do. I know that too. She held his gaze. I'm trusting you now. He was quiet for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he said, I'll vote with you. She let out a breath she'd been holding at a level below consciousness. Thank you. Don't thank me. He gathered the papers she'd shared and slid them back across to her. Win the vote, and then fix the trust problem. Because if you'd brought this forward 2 weeks ago, I know, she said. I know. She called Ethan from the car afterward. He answered immediately. Carmichael is with us, she said. A pause. Not surprise. He didn't do surprise, but something like satisfaction, quiet and contained. 6 votes. 6 votes. She merged onto the expressway. What are you doing right now? I'm watching Whitfield's building. He made 2 calls from a payphone on the corner at 12:40. A beat. He knows something is shifting. I don't know what tipped him. She thought about the conversation in her office, about the way he'd watched her face when he mentioned Nguyen, about whether she'd held it as well as she thought. Maybe I wasn't as steady as I believed, she said. Maybe. Or maybe Voss's people have better surveillance than we've accounted for. He paused. Either way, he's going to move faster now. Whatever the final play is, it's going to happen in the next 48 hours. Not on the day of the vote. What do? We make sure that whatever he does, we're already ahead of it. He said it with the specific calm of someone who had been in situations where the plan changed and survival required you to be comfortable with that. Tonight, I need you somewhere I can control, not the hotel. They may have the address by now. I have a place. Whose place? Mine. A brief pause. Apartment on Delancey. It's not what you're used to. She almost laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, how close to the surface it was. I don't care about comfortable right now. I know you don't, he said. That's one of the things He stopped, started again. 7 o'clock. I'll text you the entry code. He hung up, and she drove through the afternoon city with the photographs in her bag and Paul Carmichael's vote in her pocket, and 2 days left to hold a company together against a man who'd spent 7 months trying to take it apart. She thought about what Ethan had almost said. That's one of the things She let it go. There was too much to hold right now, and some things could wait until there was space for them. 2 days. She just needed 2 more days. The apartment on Delancey was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been renovated once in the 90s and not substantially since. The elevator didn't work. The hallway smelled like someone's dinner and old carpet. The entry code Ethan had texted her opened a door that stuck slightly in its frame, the kind of thing you fixed with a shoulder if you knew the trick of it. Victoria stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. It was clean. That was the first thing she registered. Not in the staged, impersonal way of hotels or the curated way of homes that expected guests, but clean in the way of someone who had a system and kept to it. A kitchen visible from the entry, a table with 2 chairs, a couch that had been sat on a great deal. And on the wall beside the small television, a collection of drawings done in crayon and marker, taped at uneven heights and various angles. Boats, what appeared to be a horse, several attempted portraits of a cat that did not appear to own a cat, and one careful drawing of a man and a small girl holding hands under a yellow sun. She was still looking at the drawings when Ethan came in from the kitchen. She did those over the summer, he said. He handed her a mug of coffee, didn't apologize for the apartment, didn't explain it. You can take the couch. I'll be up. You're not sleeping? Not until this is settled. She sat on the couch and curled her hands around the mug and looked at the drawings again. The man in the crayon drawing was recognizably Ethan, or Lily's version of him, which amounted to the same thing. Dark hair, serious face, and something about the way the child had drawn the arms that suggested she'd been trying hard to capture something specific, how they felt maybe, rather than how they looked. She's talented, Victoria said. She's 8, he said. Everything 8-year-olds make looks talented to their parents. But he said it with a particular quality in his voice that made clear he thought she actually was. He sat in the chair across from her and opened his laptop. Back to work. Because that was how he managed the things he couldn't control. By focusing on the things he could. She recognized it because she did the same thing, had done it her whole adult life, and it was strange to see it in someone else and understand it so plainly. Conrad Ryle left the city this afternoon, he said. My contact tracked his movement to a transit hub. He's not coming back for this, which means Voss has already decided the direct pressure approach is done. He's pivoting to the board. He's going to make a formal motion through Whitfield tomorrow, emergency board session. He'll frame it as a governance crisis, cite the security incidents, Nguyen's disappearance, the parking garage, frame it all as evidence that leadership has lost control of the company's security environment. He looked up from the screen. He's going to ask for a temporary suspension of your CEO authority pending an independent review. A suspension is functionally the same as removal before the vote. Yes, he can call an emergency session. Whitfield can, as COO, if he cites a material risk to company operations. The board bylaws allow it. He paused. I pulled your company's governance documents this afternoon. Of course you did. She set her mug down. If he calls the session before the scheduled vote, the Helios vote gets tabled during review, the acquisition window closes. Voss moves in. Victoria was quiet, working through it. The fire was in her chest now, not panic, something more operational than that. The feeling of a situation compressing toward its final shape, and the need to find the right counter before it locked. He needs board majority to carry the suspension motion, she said. Whitfield, Hatch, Reyes, that's 3. He needs 5 of 9. He has a 4th, Ethan said. Robert Chen. I found a connection tonight. Chen's private investment vehicle holds a minority position in a Voss subsidiary. He's financially tied to Voss's performance. I don't think it's a conscious corruption. I think Chen doesn't see it as a conflict, but he'll vote the way his interests point. 4 out of 9, he still needs 5. He'll try for Daniel Park, your youngest board member. He's been vocal about wanting the company to pursue more aggressive international expansion. Voss has been running a quiet campaign suggesting that removing you is the first step toward that expansion. Daniel is smart enough to see through that. Smart and convinced are different things. Ethan looked at her. He's had 3 private dinners with Whitfield in the last month. Victoria pressed her fingers to her temple. If Whitfield calls the emergency session tomorrow and Daniel votes with them, suspension passes 5-4. The Helios vote gets buried. The acquisition dies. That's the play. She looked at Ethan across the small room, at the crayon drawings on the wall behind him, at the man who had been fixing light fixtures 18 months ago and was now sitting in his daughter's apartment at midnight, dismantling a corporate conspiracy because he had stepped out of a shadow for reasons he had described, simply as because he saw what was happening. "I need to talk to Daniel tonight," she said. "It's almost midnight." "I know what time it is." Ethan held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "You want me to find his home address?" "I have his home address." She was already reaching for her phone. "I've just never used it at midnight before," she called. It rang 6 times, and she was composing an apology for the voicemail when Daniel Park answered with the hoarse, slightly bewildered voice of someone pulled out of the first stage of sleep. "Victoria." "I'm sorry for the hour," she said. "I need 30 minutes, in person, tonight." A pause. "Is someone dead?" "Not yet." She said it without drama and heard him sit up in bed. "Where are you?" She looked at Ethan, who gave a slight shake of his head. "Don't bring him here." "I'll come to you," she said. 20 minutes. Daniel Park lived in a high-rise 20 blocks north, and he answered the door in a sweatshirt and pajama pants with the specific expression of a 34-year-old who had worked too hard for too long to be surprised by much. He let her in. She sat at his kitchen counter and laid out everything. Not the curated version she'd given Carmichael, but everything. Whitfield. When? The photographs, the transfers, Conrad Ryle, the emergency session that was going to be called tomorrow morning. She watched his face move through it. Skepticism, then the particular stillness of someone whose skepticism is meeting evidence it can't comfortably dismiss. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He poured himself a glass of water, stood at the counter with it. "Whitfield has been to my apartment," he said. "I know. He told me the company needed new direction, that you'd been insular, that you didn't trust the board." He set the glass down. He made it sound like a collegial concern, like he was doing me a favor by bringing me in. He was doing himself a favor. "Yeah." Daniel looked at the photographs she'd laid on his counter. "I didn't take any money. I want to be clear about that." "I know you didn't. He was working your ambitions, not your wallet. That's how he works." She paused. "If he calls the emergency session tomorrow, how are you going to vote?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I was leaning toward the suspension, not because I wanted you out, because I believed what he said about the security situation being a governance failure." He met her eyes. He framed it as protecting the company. He is not protecting the company. He is stealing it. Daniel looked at her. He was young for a board member, young enough that the situation was still registering in real time, that he hadn't yet developed the practiced composure that came with being in rooms where large things happened, and you needed to look like they didn't surprise you. "If I vote against suspension and vote for Helios," he said slowly, "and this goes wrong, if there's something I'm not seeing, some reason your position on the acquisition is wrong, then you voted your honest judgment based on the information available to you. That's all any of us can do." She looked at him steadily. "But Daniel, Whitfield calling an emergency session tomorrow morning, the day before the scheduled vote, based on incidents that his allies created. That's not governance. That's a raid." He stood there for another moment. Then he picked up the photographs and looked at them carefully, the way he looked at financial models, trying to find the angle where the thing broke down. It didn't break down. "I'll vote against suspension," he said. "And I'll vote for the acquisition." She let out a breath. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's over." She left his apartment at 12:50 a.m. and texted Ethan 2 words. "He's in." The response came back before she reached the elevator. "Get some sleep." She almost texted back that she couldn't sleep. Then she didn't, because she knew he'd probably just say sleep anyway, and she was too tired to argue. James Whitfield called the emergency board session at 8:15 the next morning. The notification came through the official governance channel at 8:16. 11 board members and officers, a clinical subject line, emergency session request, material governance concern, 10 a.m. By the time Victoria was in her car, she had 3 texts from board members asking what was happening. One from Clara saying she'd cleared the morning schedule, and one from an unknown number that she suspected was Ethan saying simply, "I'll be in the building." She arrived at Harrington Technologies at 9:20. She went to her office, sat at her desk, and spent the next 35 minutes reviewing the complete package one final time. The photographs, the financial analysis, the timeline, Nguyen's written statement that her attorney had collected officially that morning at the Westbrook facility. Every piece in order, organized with the kind of cold clarity she'd always been able to find when it mattered. At 5 to 10, she walked to the boardroom. James Whitfield was already there. He looked up when she came in, and for just a fraction of a second, before the performance reasserted itself, she saw something pass across his face that wasn't confidence. It was the look of someone who has set something in motion and is only now, at the moment of consequence, understanding it can't be stopped. She sat at the head of the table, where she always sat. She put her folder in front of her and folded her hands on top of it and looked at the room filling with board members in the way she'd looked at hundreds of difficult rooms over the years, as a problem to be solved, not a threat to be survived. Gerald Hatch sat down across from her and gave her a cautious, apologetic look that told her he knew this was uncomfortable. Sandra Reyes sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Paul Carmichael came in, caught Victoria's eye briefly, and sat without expression. Daniel Park was last, taking his seat at the far end. Robert Chen arrived with Whitfield's attorney, which was the tell, Victoria thought, bringing outside legal to an internal board session. It meant Whitfield had expected to need enforcement mechanisms today. He wasn't going to need them for the reasons he thought. Whitfield stood. He was polished. She'd always known he was polished, but watching him now was a different experience, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. The same notes, the wrong pitch. He laid out his case with the thoroughness of someone who had been preparing it for months. The parking garage incident, Nguyen's disappearance, the pattern of security failures, the liability exposure. He used the word governance 12 times. He used the word protection 4 times, always in reference to the company, never to the people in it. He did not mention Marcus Voss. When he finished, he looked around the room with the expression of a man who believed he was watching something inevitable. "I'd like to respond," Victoria said. Whitfield's attorney started to say something about procedure. Victoria looked at him with a particular quality of stillness that was her version of a warning, and he stopped. She opened her folder. "On the question of governance," she said, "I want to share some information with the board that is directly relevant to the events Mr. Whitfield has just described." She passed the first set of documents down both sides of the table, the financial transfers. 7 months of them, time-stamped, formatted cleanly, with the corresponding board communications they'd followed within 48 hours. The room was very quiet. She passed the photographs. Gerald Hatch picked his up, looked at them, set them down, and looked at Whitfield. "These transfers," she said, keeping her voice even and factual, the way she always spoke when the facts were doing the work, represent a systematic transmission of confidential board communications to a competitor's acquisition team. The photographs show your COO in a documented meeting with Dennis Carr, Vice President of Corporate Development at Voss Capital Group, 3 weeks before the scheduled Helios vote. She paused. The security incidents Mr. Whitfield cited, the parking garage, my security director's disappearance, were not the result of a governance failure. They were organized by the same network that has been receiving our confidential information for 7 months. She looked at Whitfield. And Mr. Whitfield was the source. The silence in the room was the particular quality of silence that happens when something large shifts. Not loud, not dramatic, just the weight of a thing landing. Whitfield stood. "This is..." Marcus Nguyen is alive, she said. He's currently in a medical facility receiving treatment for injuries sustained when he was taken against his will 3 days ago by associates working on behalf of the same interest group. He has provided a full written statement and corroborating photographs. Federal investigators received a copy of this package at 9 o'clock this morning. That last sentence landed differently than the rest. She saw it move through the room, the word federal, and she saw Robert Chen sit back in his chair and look at the ceiling and understand that whatever he'd believed he was voting on today had changed shape entirely. Whitfield's attorney leaned toward him and said something in a low voice. Whitfield shook his head, once, sharply. The emergency session motion, Whitfield said, was filed in good faith based on James. Paul Carmichael spoke quietly from his end of the table. Stop. Whitfield looked at him. Stop talking, Carmichael said. The gentleness in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. Get your attorney and stop talking. The room held. No one moved for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then Whitfield sat down. He put his hands flat on the table, and he looked at them, and he didn't say anything else. Touched. Federal investigators formally arrived at Harrington Technologies at 2:15 that afternoon. James Whitfield left the building at 2:40 with his personal attorney and a hard drive that had been voluntarily surrendered under legal counsel's advice. Robert Chen issued a statement of recusal from the board pending independent review of his investment disclosures. The emergency session motion was withdrawn before it could be formally voted on. The Helios acquisition vote proceeded the following morning as scheduled. It passed 7-1. Gerald Hatch, to his credit, voted in favor. Sandra Reyes surprised everyone, including Victoria, by not only voting yes, but delivering a 3-minute statement about the importance of continuity and long-term thinking that she'd clearly written the night before. Robert Chen abstained. Whitfield's seat at the table was empty. Victoria announced the result to the company at 11 a.m. She kept the statement short. 3 paragraphs. No drama. No self-congratulation. The acquisition was complete. The company was moving forward. There would be changes at the leadership level in the coming weeks that she would communicate transparently. She didn't mention what had happened, not because she wanted to protect anyone, but because the people in the room who mattered already knew, and the people who didn't know yet would learn in the appropriate order. She was in her office by noon, working through the first post-vote communications, when Clara appeared in the doorway. There's someone here, Clara said. Not an appointment. He said to tell you it's the maintenance guy. Victoria looked up. Ethan was standing near the window in the small waiting area outside her office. Not sitting, because he was never the kind of person who waited comfortably, in his work jacket with the Breslin logo on the shoulder. He looked like he'd slept, which she was glad about. He looked like himself, which she was also glad about, though she didn't examine that feeling too closely at noon on a workday. It passed, she said. I heard. He glanced at the window. Congratulations. Come in. He followed her into the office and stood near the desk while she sat, and there was a brief, slightly awkward interval where neither of them said anything, and the room held everything that had happened in the last 6 days in a compressed, particular way. Nguyen is being transferred to Mercy General this afternoon, she said. Full care, company coverage as long as he needs it. He'll be fine. He's hard to put down. I know. He proved that. She looked at Ethan. I talked to my attorney this morning about the people who organized the garage, about Ryle. What did he say? That the federal case against Whitfield will likely pull in the broader network, that Voss is already under preliminary inquiry for the acquisitions in his previous targets. She paused. My attorney thinks Voss knew about you specifically, that he had intelligence suggesting you were connected to my building and he designed the approach around it. Ethan nodded slowly. That's my read too. Does that put you at continued risk? He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. Less now than before. The operation is blown. Ryle is gone. The people who knew what I was are either under federal scrutiny or running their own damage control. He paused. I'll stay careful, but I'm good at careful. Your daughter. When does she come back? I'm driving to Rockford this weekend. A brief pause. She thinks I went on a business trip. I told her I was helping fix some complicated problems in a big building. Victoria smiled at that. A real one, not the professional kind. That's not inaccurate. No. He almost smiled back. It's not. She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and slid an envelope across the desk toward him. He looked at it but didn't pick it up. What is that? What I owe you. For the week. You don't owe me, Ethan. She said his name with a gentle firmness. Please don't tell me you don't want to be paid for what you did. You have a daughter in Rockford and a month-to-month lease and a job that doesn't pay what your experience is worth. Take it. He was quiet for a moment. He picked up the envelope, looked at it without opening it, set it in his jacket pocket. Thank you, he said. Like it cost him something, but not too much. There's something else in there, she said. A second envelope. He reached back into his pocket and pulled out the envelope again, opened it this time. Inside was a letter on company letterhead, folded once. He read it. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something shifted. A slight tightening around his eyes, then a release. Director of Corporate Security, he said. It's a real position. It's been vacant for 8 years because I never found anyone I was willing to put in it. She leaned back in her chair. The salary is in the letter. The structure is flexible. You'd report directly to me and only to me. Your hours can work around Lily's school schedule. She paused. You'd be done with the maintenance work, but you could stay in the building if you wanted. I won't pretend that doesn't make me feel better. He set the letter down on the desk, looked at it, looked at her. I told myself I was done with this kind of work, he said. I know. It's not something I decided lightly. I know that too. She held his gaze. But I think you also know the difference between the work you left and what this would be. I'm not asking you to go back to what cost you. I'm asking you to use what you know to protect something that isn't a government operation. It's a company full of people who show up and do their jobs and don't know most of what happened this week. She paused. Lily could grow up in this city, in a school she doesn't have to leave. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she let it be quiet and didn't fill it. Can I have a few days, he said finally, to think about it? Of course. And to talk to Lily. That surprised her. You'd ask an 8-year-old. I'd explain the situation in 8-year-old terms and see what she thinks. He picked up the letter and folded it back into the envelope. She's smarter than people expect. That happens when you move around a lot and have to figure out new rooms. Victoria thought about a little girl drawing crayon portraits of her father on an apartment wall who had figured out how to make new rooms home. She thought about what it cost to be that adaptable. She thought about what it would mean to stop having to be. Take your time, she said. He stood, extended his hand, which felt both slightly formal and entirely right given who they both were. She shook it. For what it's worth, he said, you held up well the whole week. A lot of people would have... He paused. Most people in your position would have made it smaller, made it about protecting the company's image instead of actually solving it. She looked at him. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. The almost smile was back. But yes. He left the way he always left, directly, without lingering, taking up exactly as much space as he needed, and leaving the room feeling different than it had before he was in it. Yeah. 3 weeks later, Marcus Nguyen walked back into Harrington Technologies on a Tuesday morning. He had a slight stiffness in his right hand that his physical therapist said would improve. He went to his office, hung up his coat, and sent Victoria a 2-line email. Back. Let me know if there's anything that needs handling. She replied, welcome back. Take the rest of the week easy. He replied, no. She laughed, actually laughed, alone in her office, and went back to work. James Whitfield accepted a plea agreement that December. The federal case was still building, but Whitfield's cooperation bought him something considerably less than what he deserved, and considerably more than what Voss's legal team managed to negotiate. Marcus Voss himself became the subject of a formal SEC investigation by February, his acquisition strategy unraveling in the methodical way these things unravel when someone starts pulling the right thread in the right order. Dennis Carr resigned from Voss Capital Group before Christmas and was rumored to have retained criminal defense counsel. Conrad Ryle was never formally charged with anything connected to this specific situation, but Ethan's contact, whoever that person was, Victoria never learned a name, apparently filed information with the appropriate federal agencies, and Ryle's activities in the private contracting world became considerably more difficult in the months that followed. Ethan Cole accepted the position. He told her on a Thursday morning, standing in the same waiting area outside her office where she'd first seen him after the vote. He said it simply, the way he said most things, that he'd talked to Lily, that she'd said it sounded good because she liked their apartment and she liked her school and she didn't want to move again. He said it like that was the deciding factor, which she suspected was both completely true and not the whole truth. She said, "Good. HR will need about a week to process everything. You can start officially after that." He said, "I'll still do the light fixtures on 6. Someone needs to." She said, "I'll tell facilities." He nodded and left, and Clara appeared in the doorway 2 minutes later with a look on her face that said she'd been listening from the outer office and had opinions. "He's interesting," Clara said. "He's capable," Victoria said. "That's what matters." Clara gave her a look that said those two things were not mutually exclusive and went back to her desk. Tochram. There's a thing that happens to people who build something large and difficult from nothing. A particular kind of loneliness that comes with it. The loneliness of being the one who sees everything most clearly and having no one to talk to about what you see. Victoria Harrington had lived in that loneliness for years without quite naming it. She'd mistaken it for independence. She told herself that trust was a liability and privacy was a strength, and the distance between herself and everyone around her was a choice she'd made deliberately. It wasn't entirely wrong. It had kept her safe in a specific way. It had also kept her in a room that was getting smaller than she'd noticed. What she understood afterward, not immediately, not in a single moment, but gradually, the way you understand the things that actually change you, was that the week she spent working alongside Ethan Cole had shown her something about the difference between being alone and being careful. He was careful. He was more careful than anyone she'd ever met. But he wasn't alone. He had an 8-year-old who drew him on a wall in crayon. He had a contact he could call at midnight who moved without being asked. He had, apparently, the specific kind of trust that gets built not by giving people no reason to betray you, but by giving them a reason not to want to. She'd spent 8 years building a company around the first model. She thought she might spend the next 8 trying the second. That wasn't a clean resolution. It wasn't a lesson she could put in a frame. It was a direction, the kind of thing you aim at while knowing you'll miss it sometimes, that the missing is part of how you get closer. She was in the end a person who'd built something real from nothing, who'd survived a week that had tried to take it all away, who'd learned, late and imperfectly, and in the middle of a parking garage at midnight, that the strongest position isn't the one where you need no one. It's the one where you found the right people, and you've had the sense to let them stand beside you. The greatest ones never announce themselves. They don't carry signs or make speeches. They step out of a shadow when the moment requires it. They do the thing that needs doing, and then they go back to making lunches and picking up their daughters and living the ordinary life that the world consistently undervalues and consistently relies on. You've met them. You've probably looked past them. Don't make that mistake twice.